Through you, Mr. Chair, I can confirm that it is 4 p.m. and we are now live streaming and recording. You may begin your meeting.
Thank you. This is a meeting of the Town of Pelham Committee of Adjustment. Quorum is present with members. Could we begin, Ms. Leach, by reading the land recognition statement?
Certainly. We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and the friendships of the Indigenous peoples. Through you, Mr. Chair, you may proceed with your introduction.
Thank you, Ms. Leach. There's three members of the committee here today. There's Mr. Rodbard, Ms. Stand, and myself, Isaiah Bannock. We also have Mr. Andrew Edwards, planner for the town, here as well. I'm to start with some opening comments before we move into the agenda. This is a hybrid hearing of the Committee of Adjustment for the Town of Pelham. Everyone present and viewing at home via live stream will be given an opportunity to comment on the applications being heard. Agencies commenting on applications may request that certain conditions be imposed should an application be approved. Voicing objections to these conditions will not adversely affect the committee's decision. The purpose of the application, relative correspondence, will be heard, following which the applicant will be given the opportunity to address the application. During the public portion of each application, we will hear from anyone wishing to submit verbal comments or submit written comments via email to clerks@pelham.ca, clerks@pelham.ca. Comments received following the public portion will not be considered. At the conclusion of the discussion, the committee will render a decision and advise of any applicable conditions. Specific wording for conditions may be determined by the committee following the hearing. Copies of decisions will be mailed to the applicant or agent and members of the public that have submitted comments. Notices of decision can also be obtained by request to the Secretary-Treasurer. Committee members are asked to raise your hand if you would like to speak and vote. Applicants, agents, and attendees are advised that they're free to leave the webinar or the room once a decision has been made on their application. Okay, we will move to the agenda item. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Yeah, I moved.
I second that motion.
All right, let's move to pecuniary interest. Does any member of this panel have a pecuniary interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act in any of the applications to be considered at this hearing?
I have none.
I have none.
And none from me as well. Okay, Ms. Leach, are there any requests for withdrawal or adjournment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, the applicant for A4 2024 P 1313 Victoria Avenue has requested deferral of one of the four variances, and that's section 3.1C relating to front yard setback. The request will be amended to meet building code requirements and recirculated at the next hearing. However, the three other variances will proceed this evening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we are ready to move to the first file, which is that Victoria Avenue file, 1313 Victoria Avenue file A4-2024P. I'll turn it over to you to start with the presentation.
Thank you. Committee of Adjustment hearing Tuesday, April 2nd at 4 p.m. The Town of Pelham is holding hybrid Committee of Adjustment hearings. A hybrid hearing involves a mixture of in-person and remote attendance and participation. The following presentations are based upon the Town of Pelham's Planning Department report and analysis. No decisions have been made prior to this public hearing. All comments received from commenting agencies and the public have been forwarded in full to the Committee of Adjustment members for their consideration. The Committee of Adjustment is a formal public hearing requiring decorum. This means that all comments are to be made through the chair. If you have pre-registered to speak virtually or are participating in person, you will be provided the opportunity to address the committee at the public portion of the meeting. If you are live streaming and wish to submit a comment live, please email clerks@pelham.ca. Comments must be received during the public portion of the meeting, otherwise they will not be considered. Inappropriate comments will also not be tolerated. If decorum is lost, the meeting may be recessed and persons asked to leave. Deferral, as I noted earlier, section 3.1C relating to front yard setback has been deferred to a future meeting. Application for minor variance A4, 1313 Victoria Avenue. The subject land is located on the east side of Victoria Avenue, lying south of Highway 20 West, known locally as 1313 Victoria Avenue. The application seek relief from Section 3.2.2A on farm diversified uses, requesting the OFDU be permitted notwithstanding the use is not directly related to the existing permitted agricultural uses on the lot and shall primarily serve the existing permitted agricultural uses on the lot and the existing permitted agricultural uses surrounding lots in the area. Section 3.2.2B on farm diversified uses, requesting the OFDU be permitted notwithstanding the product is not produced by or derived from the principal agricultural uses on the lot as the primary source of the majority of the product. And Section 3.1C on farm diversified uses, requesting a front yard setback of 14 meters to an 18-meter squared accessory structure related to a food truck, whereas OFDUs are not permitted in the front yard, the required front yard. To date, the following comments have been received. Public Works Department, the applicant shall circulate the comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan should the region require it. The lot grading and drainage plan will be required as part of the site plan approval process. Niagara Region, staff requests the submission of a detailed site plan at the site plan approval stage showing the total development envelope coverage for the site, including parking, seating areas, septic system, etc., in square meters. In lieu of an archaeological assessment, staff request that the applicant provide an archaeological advisory clause for inclusion in the site plan application, and this is noted within the planning report. In conclusion, regional staff offer no objection to the minor variance application. At the site plan stage, staff will require the submission of a detailed site plan to confirm that the proposal is consistent with the criteria for OFDUs outlined in the OMAFRA guidelines on permitted uses in Ontario's prime agricultural areas. The detailed site plan should account for all aspects related to the OFDU, including but not limited to any outdoor storage areas, landscaped areas, septic system, parking areas, seating areas, etc. Minor variance test 1 is the variance minor in nature. Section 3.2.2A and B, yes, the OFDU is limited in area as stipulated in provincial legislation, is located on a portion of the site that is not actively farmed, is similar in character to the surrounding area, and is not anticipated to have negative impacts in terms of traffic and noise. Section 3.1C on farm diversified uses, yes, the agricultural character of the neighborhood is not anticipated to be impacted through the reduced setback to the OFDU. The lot area remains available to handle stormwater runoff and has adequate area for the OFDU to function. Minor variance test 2 is the variance desirable for the development or use of the land. Section 3.2.2A and B, yes. The use is not anticipated to be incompatible with the surrounding agricultural area. It's not anticipated to cause adverse impacts in terms of traffic volume, noise, or taking agricultural lands out of active production. Section 3.1C, yes, the location is desirable as the reduced setback will enable the proposed use to be located close to the street for visibility, however, maintaining a generous setback as to not affect sight lines and to alter the character of the surrounding agricultural area. Minor variance test 3, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Section 3.2.2A and B, yes, the OFDU will not disturb or degrade lands that are in active agricultural production. The use will support the land's intended use for agricultural production and will enable the owners to continue to farm the lands and to remain economically viable to do so. The use has been operating on a seasonal basis in recent years due to the COVID-19 pandemic under a temporary license without complaints from neighboring landowners or the general public. It appears that the use is compatible with the surrounding area. Section 3.1C, yes, the OFDU has been designed and sited as to not detract from the agricultural use of the property. Minor variance test 4, does the variance maintain the general intent or purpose of the official plan? Sections 3.2.2A and B, yes, the use provides an opportunity for the owners to enhance the economic viability of the farm while supporting rural economic development. In the long run, this supports the agricultural use of the lands. Section 3.1C, Yes, the requested variances should not have no impact on the agricultural viability of the surrounding area and will not compromise the objectives of the official plan with respect to land use compatibility, stormwater runoff, and private sewage system servicing capabilities. Based on the analysis, staff is of the opinion the variance is minor in nature, conforms to the general policies and intent of both the official plan and zoning bylaw, and is appropriate for the development and use of the land. Planning staff recommends that application number A4 be approved, subject to the following condition: that the applicant apply for site plan approval and enter into a site plan agreement with the town to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leach. We're now going to open the public portion of the meeting, starting with if there's anything from the applicant, if there's a presentation that they would like to give or any notes for the committee. If you could start with your names, please. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Robert Smith. I'm a planner with NBC.
Sorry, if you could just turn on the microphone, just press the button, and perfect. Thank you.
My name is Robert Smith. I'm a planner with NPG, and I'm with Jesse Auspitz, who's principal planner from Toronto, from NPG. I agree. We agree with the town comments. We're here for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Yeah, well, maybe I'll ask the committee first. Are there any questions for the applicant?
No questions for the applicant.
I have no question.
Yeah, I wanted to hone in on the zoning bylaw test of the minor variance test here, and I looked at this really closely and gave a lot of time looking at the zoning bylaw as well. You know, I see how this is meets the intent and purpose of the official plan. You know, the official plan seems to reflect the OMAFRA guidelines and the direction from the PPS as well in this respect. I can see how it's desirable for the purpose of the use. I can see how it's minor in relative scale. I get to the zoning test and I ask myself, why is it that the zoning bylaw has a limitation for the on-farm diversified uses to be tied to the lot? And they only find that in the zoning bylaw. We don't see that in the official plan. We don't see that in OMAFRA guidelines or the PPS. So I wanted to get your view on that. I wanted to understand that a little bit better. Why are we meeting the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw when there is a additional requirement in the zoning bylaw? Really, the zoning ties it to uses on the lot, which is different than the other standard elsewhere. So maybe you could help me with that.
Sure. I believe the staff report comments on that. The intent of that provision in the zoning bylaw was just that the on-farm diversified use be compatible with the agricultural use on the property. I believe as we've described, the proposed on-farm diversified use is still compatible with the the primary agricultural use. It's also provincial. The provincial policy does not require that on-farm diversified uses be directly relatable to the primary agricultural use. The intent of the on-farm diversified use, sorry. 1 second. Well, the intent of the on-farm diversified use is just to allow the farmer to diversify in a way that's still compatible with the agricultural use, but it just allows them to be a bit more economical.
I'd like to add as well, the on-farm diversified use, we're not varying the definition of on-farm diversified use, so we still would comply with the definition. We are specifically varying standards related to the use. And as noted, the intent of the zoning bylaw is to implement provincial and regional and town policies regarding on-farm diversified uses.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the committee from my question?
None.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate, thank you for your answers. I still frankly have some difficulty with it because the zoning bylaw, when I read it as a whole, I read it as narrowing what's in the PPS, narrowing what's in the official plan. It reads as the use shall be accessory and directly related to the existing permitted uses on the lot and primarily serve the existing permitted agricultural uses on the lot and the existing agricultural uses on the surrounding lots in the area. Now, that isn't in the OMAFR guidelines, that isn't in the OP, that is in the PPS, so I get that. And I get the compatibility bit as well. But when I ask myself, what's the purpose and intent? What's the purpose and intent of doing this? And when I read the whole zoning bylaw, I don't know, I'm struggling with that for that reason, because they have very explicit language around uses on the lot.
Yeah, I'll add one thing that I said previously. So the intent of on-farm diversified use, I believe I touched on this, are that they're intended to enable farm operators to diversify and supplement their farm income, unlike agricultural-related uses. This is the difference between ag-related uses and on-farm diversified uses, is that there's no requirement in provincial policy that they be directly related to the primary agricultural operations. This was previously confirmed by the Ontario Municipal Board, which determined that such a requirement would render the definition of on-farm diversified uses redundant and devoid of meaningful utility. The purpose of permitting these uses is to enable additional activities on agricultural lands, sustaining relatively small parcels of agricultural land that might otherwise be uneconomical to farm.
Sorry, can I add as well? So the zoning bylaw does include definitions for agriculture-related and on-farm diversified uses. If the intent of the zoning bylaw, I mean, by definition, the difference between the main difference between an agricultural-related use and an on-farm diversified use is that on-farm diversified uses are not related to the primary agricultural use on the property. If they were, they would be considered agricultural-related uses. If the intent of the zoning bylaw was to restrict on-farm diversified uses, the definition would not be included within the town zoning bylaw.
Right, fair enough. I see that. But the choice of words was on the lot. You know, it wasn't in the area or something, or mostly on the lot or something like that. So you can see why I'm struggling with that. I'm trying to understand it better, and I look closely at the Southgate OMB case, but that was a rezoning case, and it's very clear that you in a rezoning, you don't have to tie. It doesn't have to be a use on the lot. I think that was very clear from that case, but
The intent of the on-farm diversified uses from the province is, regardless of its zoning or anything, it's not that it's directly related to the agricultural use on the property.
Right.
That's nowhere in any provincial policy doesn't state that.
Right. Right. So, okay. Are there any comments? I'll ask again from my fellow members here. Any comments for the presenters?
I have a question for planning staff, but it can be whenever.
Okay. Well, it's up to you. Would you like to do that while we're still in this portion of the meeting, or wait for that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks for responding to my questions as well. Is there anyone else in the room who would like to speak to this matter? Okay. Is there anyone online, Ms. Leach, who would like to speak to this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is 4:18 p.m. and we've received no emails. You may close the public portion.
Okay. Is there a motion to do that, to close the public portion?
Motion to close the public portion of the meeting?
Yeah, seconded.
Thank you.
Okay, so the public portion's now closed. Maybe this is a good time, Ms. Stan, if you have a question for
I
for
just have
staff.
a question of planning staff in terms of, I read in the report that it's supposed to be between April and October in terms of the seasonal nature of this use. So is there anything, is that through the site plan agreement you would tie that down, or how would you ensure that it doesn't become sort of a year-long endeavor? Or
Through the chair, that could be included as a clause in the site plan agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay. As I expressed during my questions to the presenters, I think this use is a practical use of the property. I understand how it satisfies most of the components of the test. I have some apprehension about the way the zoning bylaw reads as a whole, whether it meets the intent and purpose. I'm not going to be voting on this matter for that reason, so I will turn it over to others for any motions relating to that.
I can read the motion. So applications are made for a minor variance to permit on-farm diversified use notwithstanding the use is not directly related to the existing permitted agricultural uses. On-farm diversified use notwithstanding the product is not produced by or derived from the principal agricultural uses. A front yard setback of 14 meters for a mobile food truck. For a food truck, the applications are granted. The variances are minor in nature as the OFDU is limited in areas located on a portion of the site that is not actively farmed, is similar in character to the surrounding area, and is not anticipated to have negative impacts in terms of traffic and noise. The agricultural character of the neighborhood is not anticipated to be impacted. The lot area remains available to handle stormwater runoff and has adequate area for the OFDU to function. The intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained. The intent of the official plan is maintained. The proposals are desirable for the land as the use is not anticipated to be incompatible with the surrounding agricultural area, is not anticipated to cause adverse impacts in terms of traffic volumes, noise, or taking agricultural lands out of active production. The reduced setback will enable the proposed use to be located close to the street for visibility while maintaining a generous setback so as not to affect sight lines and to alter the character of the surrounding agricultural area. These applications are granted without prejudice to any other application in the town of Pelham. The Committee of Adjustment considered the written and oral comments and agrees with the minor variance report analysis and recommendation that this application meets the Planning Act test for minor variance. And the condition is that they apply for and enter into a site plan agreement.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so I would be looking for a seconder for that motion to approve. Thank you. Mr. Radbard has seconded the motion, and
Okay, so that's carried. Variances are approved for that matter. We will move to the next matter on our agenda, which is 35 Filmori Boulevard, file A5-2024.
application for minor variance A5/2024, 35 Filmori. The subject land is a corner lot on Filmori Boulevard lying east of Joyce Crescent. The application seeks relief from section 3.1C, accessory uses, buildings and structures, to permit an exterior side yard setback of 1.2 meters, whereas 3 meters is required. To date, the following comments have been received from the Building Division. A building permit is not required for the proposed accessory structure. Public Works Department, applicant must acknowledge that the trees located within the rear yard easement will not impact the function of the rear yard swales. Any future maintenance work required by the town to maintain the easement could result in the removal of the trees, and they will not be replaced. Applicant must acknowledge that there is no structures to be constructed in the easement along the rear lot line, as well as see conditions. No public comments were received at the time of writing this report. Minor variance test 1 is the variance minor in nature. Yes, the reduction to the setback is not anticipated to result in a negative impact on the adjacent uses or substantially remove any of the amenity space of the lot. Minor variance test 2, is the variance desirable for the development or use of the land? Yes, the variances would allow for appropriate development of a pool and accessory structures associated with the pool on an existing lot. Minor variance test 3, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Yes, the proposal maintains adequate visibility at the curve of Philmore, allows for adequate landscaping, and does not result in overdevelopment of the site. A large daylighting triangle exists on the property, providing ample visibility at the corner of the street. Minor variance test 4, does the variance maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Yes, the requested variance is not considered to have significant impacts within the context of the official plan. The requested variances would not have a negative impact on the character of the surrounding area. Based on the analysis, staff are of the opinion the proposal makes efficient use of the land, will not result in the overbuilding of the property, will not alter the view, sightlines, or personal enjoyment of the subject property or any neighboring properties, and should not negatively impact the surrounding neighborhood with regard to land use incompatibility, traffic, privacy, and stormwater runoff. Planning staff recommend that application number A5/2024P be approved, subject to the following conditions. That the applicant obtain a pool permit from the town's bylaw department to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. That the applicant submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan to demonstrate that drainage neither relies on nor negatively impacts neighboring properties to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works or designate.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leach. Is there anyone here from the applicant that would like to speak to this? Anyone online, Ms. Leach?
Let me check. Through Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone online, and it's 4:25 p.m. and we've received no emails.
Okay, just want to check again. Anyone wishing to speak to this matter? Doesn't look like it. Okay, motion to close the public portion of the meeting?
Yeah, I'll move to close it.
I second the motion.
All right, that's closed. Any questions, comments?
I just had a question. I don't know if it's engineering or planning. There's an easement referred to. Is that a drainage easement?
To the chair, yes.
Thank you.
No question.
Yeah, that answered my question as well, Ms. Stan. So that wasn't clear from the materials, but that makes sense. So I presume no building can go over a drainage easement, which is why they've located the shed where it is. So I think, I've looked at the 4 tests and believe that this satisfies the tests, and I'm happy to support it for those reasons. Motion from anyone?
Sure.
Done? Yeah.
Want me to read the- Is it on?
I think that
Is the light red?
No.
sometimes they're difficult to push. Oh, it's not going on.
Show today?
Here.
Here we go.
It's on?
Yes.
Okay, we're looking at file A5-2024P, 35 Fillmore Boulevard, Pelham. Application are made for minor variance of an exterior side yard setback of 1.2 meters, and the application is granted. The reasons: the variances are minor in nature as no adverse impacts are anticipated. The intent of the zoning bylaw is maintained, and the intent of the official plan is maintained. The proposals are desirable for the land as it will facilitate the development of a pool and accessory structures. This application is granted without prejudice to any other application in the town of Pelham. The Committee of Adjustment considered the written and oral comments and agrees with the minor variance report analysis and recommendation that this application meets the Planning Act tests for minor variance. Conditions are: 1, obtain a pool permit; 2, submit a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan; and 3, submit a written acknowledgement that the trees located within the rear yard easement will not impact the function of the rear yard swales, and that there are no structures to be constructed in the easement along the rear lot line. And that's it. And
And I second that motion.
Thank you.
Okay, that's carried and approved for that file on Fillmore Boulevard. We will move to our next one, which is 61 Port Robinson Road, file B7, and additional files that relate to that address as well. Ms. Leach, I'll turn over to you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, there isn't additional
No,
files
this is
relating
it.
to this
This
one.
is-
I got mixed
yes.
up. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Application B7/2024 P 61 Port Robinson Road. The subject parcel is shown as parts 1 and 2 on the sketch and has a combined frontage of 33.49 meters on the north side of Port Robinson. Application is made for consent to a partial discharge of mortgage and consent to convey 634.4 square meters of land, being Part 1 for future construction of a semi-detached dwelling. Part 2 is to be retained for the continued use of the single detached dwelling. To date, the following comments have been received from the building division. A building permit is required for the proposed semi-detached dwelling on Part 1. A demolition permit approval is required for the existing detached garage on Part 1 and the site restored prior to consent finalization. Public Works Department, the newly created lots are to be self-draining. The swale on the east property line of the new lot must be on private property, not the property line. The swale on the east side of 61 Port Robinson Road must be on private property. The sump pump must discharge to grade and will not connect to the proposed RYCB. The town does not allow water services to be located under driveways. The water service for the existing house will need to be relocated to accommodate the proposed driveway. The proposed concave driveway will collect and direct all runoff to the sidewalk, which may cause ice to build up in winter months. And no public comments were received at the time of writing this report. In planning staff's opinion, the application is consistent with the PPS and conforms to provincial, regional, and local plans. The resulting parcel will comply with the applicable zoning bylaw regulations upon the granting of the concurrent, oh, sorry, that's not applicable. Planning staff recommends that application number B7 be approved, subject to the following conditions. That the applicant provide the Secretary Treasurer with a registrable legal description of the subject parcel, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. That the applicant provide final certification fee of $436 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham. That the applicant sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes are to be required prior to the issuance of a building permit. Town of Pelham Public Works staff require that the applicant submit an overall lot grading and drainage plan to demonstrate that drainage does not negatively impact or rely on neighboring properties. Town of Pelham Public Works staff require an upgraded drainage grading plan and site servicing plan showing all proposed service connections. That the applicant confirm that no existing utilities cross the proposed new property line. Should any services cross the new property line, the applicant will be responsible for the costs associated with their relocation and removal. Construction of new or modification of existing driveways requires a driveway entrance permit. This permit is obtained through the Public Works Department. All associated costs with the permit are the responsibility of the owner. Part 1 is to be individually serviced with its own sanitary and water connections. Installation of any services will require a temporary works permit obtained through the Public Works Department. These works are to be completed prior to final consent, and the applicant shall bear all costs associated with the works. Locate cards are to be provided to the town once the works are complete. A demolition permit approval is required for the existing detached garage on Part 1 and the site restored to the satisfaction of the chief building official. To you, Mr. Chair, we do have the the agent with us with a presentation.
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Start with your name, and then we can proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Craig Rowe from Upper Canada Consultants, agent on the file. I don't have a formal presentation tonight. This application before you is kind of the culmination of planning exercise we've been working on for a few months with the town now. As noted in staff report, we did get zoning approval for these lands through the new comprehensive zoning bylaw. The lands were zoned RD, residential development, which is effectively a hold zone. So we've secured an R2 zoning, which allows for the severance of the property. We now have lot areas, frontages, metrics to provide a built form in there. So the intent is to keep the single detached dwelling for now, construct a semi-detached dwelling on the lot to the west, and then that R2 zone may allow for the redevelopment of the single detached dwelling in the future. So we've read through the staff report. These are all comments and conditions. We've been working with staff through the zoning process and now into this, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. We have no objections to the conditions applied either.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Any questions or comments?
I have no questions.
No question.
And none from me either. Thank you. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Rowe. Is there anyone else in here that would like to speak to this matter? Yes, come on up. Yes. Absolutely, yeah. Come on up to the microphone and let us know, make sure that's turned on there if the light's red, and then start with your name, please, and let us know your comments.
Hey, my name is Shuai. I'm actually the adjacent neighbor. Forgive me if I'm using some weird languages for cultural language barrier. So I'm actually the adjacent neighbor. I know that the purpose of today's application is to build a future semi-residential property. And there's actually a water runoff across, actually entering this property line from the west. We would assume there's gonna be a variance on that water runoff. And we would like to know that if it's gonna be relocated to the boundary of the property line, which would possibly potential damage the driveway of adjacent property. Yeah, that's a main concern.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to try to summarize, I think, what you said, and you tell me if this is accurate. So you're the adjacent neighbor, and you have some concerns about how water may run off, what the effects of the construction with the building, the effects of the consent, I should say, could have on drainage and water. I will invite Mr. Rowe in a minute to come up and perhaps respond to that. But before we do so, I wanted to ask the committee if there are any questions for the presenter.
I have no questions.
No question.
Okay, thank you. So I'll invite Mr. Rowe to come up, and we'll speak more to this issue in a moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to the question, we did provide a copy of a preliminary site servicing grading plan with our submissions. So effectively, what we have right now is the water flows come from the west over on Station Street. They come down and they kind of mid-property enter at the west and kind of move up northeast towards the current edge of the property. So what we've shown in our plan here is that where those existing flows are coming, they will be accommodated and continue to be accommodated on the property. We'll just be realigning through a swale along the side of the dwelling towards the rear portion of the property, not right at the property line. It's offset actually a fair distance there. I'd say about 5 or 6 meters from the rear property line, for example. I'm not quite certain which adjacent property we're referring to, but basically this would be moved, and we would be conveying that existing stormwater flow through the property to an existing outlet where there is a ditch and a culvert on the adjacent lands to the east. So the maintenance of all that stormwater flow would be captured, collected, and moved through the property as it is currently, but under a more properly controlled manner.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. And what's the role, what happens with the drainage plans and the role of the municipality in looking at that and what you just described?
Through Mr. Chair, typically what happens is we would put together as a condition of consent preliminary lot grading and servicing plan to show how everything's going to be built. We're currently waiting on the exact house plans from our clients, so we'll be able to have a quite accurate diagram put together. One of the things that the town would be looking for is, in order to approve the building permit, they also need to approve the grading plan. So we're required under our conditions of approval to provide a plan that's to their satisfaction that demonstrates no negative impact. And if that's the case, then they can grant the building permit for us.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I said thank you for that. I didn't have my mic on. So I do see, I'm looking at this now, that there's a condition relating to the overall lot grading and drainage plan, which is sign off, what you were referring to there, Mr. Rowe. So any questions arising from my questions for Mr. Rowe?
None.
Okay, so are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to this? Anyone online, Ms. Leach?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone online, and it is 4:38 p.m. and we've received no emails.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rowe. I think we will, is there a motion to close the public portion of the meeting?
Motion to close the public portion of the meeting.
Seconded.
Okay, so that's closed. Any comments or questions?
I have no questions. I can do a motion if you'd like.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ms. Dan. I'll just, if I may, I'll just make a couple of comments before you do that. I think that this satisfies the requirements under the Planning Act to grant a consent, and I understand the efforts that have been made to this point to allow for this use to be here. I recognize the comments of the neighbor in relation to drainage, and I think it is a fair comment to be concerned about when there's development on the property next to it. We heard Mr. Rowe speak about drainage and that they have a plan that will be advanced for that and how the drainage will work. There's a condition which goes through the municipality, and the municipality will approve their plan relating to drainage. So there's going to be a check on that, as well as to what you heard from Mr. Rowe. So on that basis, I'm prepared to support this proposal, and recognizing the comments that we received from you as well. Okay, that's it from me. I'll hand it over to you, Ms. Stan.
Thank you. So file B7, 2024P, 61 Port Robinson Road in the town of Pelham. Applications for consent for partial discharge of mortgage and to convey Part 1 is hereby granted, subject to the following conditions: to the satisfaction of Public Works, that the applicant submit an overall lot grading and drainage plan. The plan shall show all proposed service connection locations, that the applicant confirm that no existing utilities currently cross the proposed new property lines. A construction of new or modification of existing driveways requires a driveway entrance permit. Part 1 is to be individually serviced with its own sanitary and water connections. Installation of any services will require a temporary works permit obtained through the Public Works Department. Locate cards are to be provided to the town once works are complete, and a demolition permit for the garage in Part 1 is required. To the satisfaction of planning, that the applicant submit a demolition permit approval, so I've already said that. Sign the town of Pelham standard memorandum of understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes. To the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, the Secretary Treasurer be provided with a registerable legal description of the subject parcel together with a copy of the deposited reference plan. That the final certification fee of $436 payable to the Treasurer, Town of Pelham, be submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. This decision is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to and complies with the town's official plan, regional policy plan, and the provincial policy statement and the town zoning bylaw. This decision is rendered having regard to sections 5124 and 5125 of the Planning Act. The committee considered all written and oral submissions and finds that, subject to the conditions, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent, and complies with provincial, regional, and town planning policy. The owner agrees no demolition, grading, or other soil disturbances shall take place in the subject land prior to the issuance of a Ministry of Citizen and Multiculturalism letter confirming that all archaeological resource concerns have been mitigated and meet licensing and resource conservation requirements. The owner acknowledges the newly created lots to be self-draining. The swale on the east property line of the new lot must be on private property, not on the property line. The owner acknowledges the sump pump must discharge to grade and not connect to the proposed RYCB. The owner acknowledges the water service for the existing house will need to be relocated to accommodate the proposed driveway, as the town does not allow water services to be located under driveways.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes that. That's carried relating to Port Robinson Road. We will move on to our next matter. This is 201 Canberra Road. Several files associated with this, including B4 and B5, and some minor variance files as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will proceed with the presentation for B4 and B5 concurrently. The minor variances, the associated variances will be heard separately should these files be approved. The subject parcels are shown as parts 1 and 2 on the sketch and have a frontage of 13.66 meters on the north side of Canberra Road. Applications is made for consent to a partial discharge of mortgage and consent to convey 380.9 square meters of land, Part 1, and 348 square meters of land, Part 2, for future construction of a semi-detached dwelling. Part 3 is to be dedicated to the town of Pelham for a road widening, which I do believe, Andrew, you could confirm that that's no longer required?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And Part 4 is to be retained for continued residential use. To date, the following comments have been received. From the Building Division, a building permit is required for the proposed semi-detached dwelling on Part 1 and 2. A demolition permit is required for any structures to be removed. Public Works, please be advised that no side yard walkways that impede side yard swales shall be permitted. Please note that the town does not allow any service connections for Part 4 as it is not within the urban boundary, and see applicable conditions. Niagara Region, comments in full are provided within the report. Regional staff recommend the inclusion of a standard archaeological clause in the development agreement. They recommended conditions of approval relating to each proposed new lot are provided to ensure EIS recommendations and mitigation measures are implemented. And again, full language is included in the report. The region will require that detailed engineering plans be provided for the proposed water servicing for the 2 new lots. Regional staff have no objection to the applications from a private servicing perspective, provided the 2 existing septic are properly decommissioned and tank decommissioning applications are submitted to the region. Planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed applications conform to the provincial, regional, and local plans. The redevelopment of this property for semi-detached dwellings is a gentle form of residential intensification within the existing neighborhood, which will have a minimal impact on adjacent land uses. Additionally, Public Works have indicated that the proposed road widening is no longer required. Planning staff recommend that the application numbers B4/2024P and B5/2024P be approved, subject to the following conditions. That the applicant confirm that no utilities cross the proposed new property line. Should any services cross this new property line, the applicant will be responsible for costs associated with their relocation and/or removal. That the applicant submit an overall lot grading and drainage plan to demonstrate that the drainage does not negatively impact or rely on neighboring properties. 2 units in the proposed Part 1 and Part 2 lot are to be individually serviced with its own sanitary and water connections if permitted. This work is to be done by the owner at the owner's expense and will require temporary work permits. Should these services cross property lines, Public Works will not support the consent to sever. These works are to be completed prior to consent, and the applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Locate cards are to be provided to the town once the works are complete. That the applicant submit a site servicing plan. Construction of new or modification to existing driveways requires a driveway entrance permit. This permit is obtained through the Public Works Department. All associated costs with the permit are the responsibility of the owner. That the applicant sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes are required prior to the issuance of a building permit. That the applicant enter into a development agreement with the town for Part 1, Part 2, and Part 4 to ensure that all recommendations of the environmental impact study dated November 29th, 2023 are implemented to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Planning and Development. And these are listed within the report and shall be included on the notice of decision. That the following archaeological advisory clause be inserted into the development agreement between the landowner and Town of Pelham. Again, language has been included in the planning report. That final approval of all necessary zoning approvals be obtained for Part 1 through the approval of minor variance application A6, as well as A7 for Part 2. And that the Secretary Treasurer be provided with a registrable legal description for the subject parcels, together with a copy of the deposited reference plan, if applicable, for use in the issuance of the certificate of consent. And that the final certification fee of $423 payable to the $436 payable to the Treasurer Town of Pelham be submitted for each application. All costs associated with fulfilling conditions shall be borne by the applicant. And to you, Mr. Chair, I do believe that we have the applicant and agent with us this evening.
Yeah, thank you, and come on up. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to clarify what we're speaking about, the order of how we're going to address this. So first, we're going to address the consents, which is the property division through B4 and B5. And then what's on the agenda next are minor variances, which only would apply in the event that this committee grants approvals for the land division through the consent. So just wanted to clarify that. And I'll turn it over to the presenter now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's William Heikup. I'm with the planning manager with Upper Canada Consultants and the agent representing the owners for the file related to 201 Canberra Road. As indicated, we have applications for consent as well as minor variance, and I'll stick to the consent at this point. So I do have a brief presentation, and I'll just run through that. Just gonna go down to the next page here. So here you can see an outline of the subject lands. As I indicated, they're municipally known as 201 Canberra Road, located on the north side of Canberra Road, west of Hay Street, east of Effingham. The lands are a large parcel that contain 3 existing single detached dwellings and a detached garage, so 4 existing structures. As you can see, the rear of the property is heavily vegetated and part of a significant woodlot. Associated with that woodlot is also a regulated valley land slope, and associated with this application, geotechnical and environmental impact studies were submitted to support the details related to the development and its interface with those 2 features. So just at this point, I want to explain the proposed application. Here you can see a cutout or a crop zooming in on the frontage of the land. The bulk of the property at the rear of the woodlot is not proposed to be changed at all. That area is not really being touched. So you can see the existing dwelling on the left-hand side that is proposed to remain. On the right-hand side in blue, you can see the 2 proposed semi-detached dwellings. I will point out, and further the comments received, the road widening is no longer required, so that yellow would actually extend to the same line as where the blue is, considering that. But that being said, this property has had development on it since the early 20th century. Over the years, those properties and existing dwellings have been significantly altered from their original state and are not currently in great shape. The additional complication or planning component that needed to be dealt with was the extent of the existing urban boundary that you can see basically cutting the line, the dash line cutting the property in half from a north-south perspective. So the westerly limit of the semi-detached dwelling is the actual urban boundary line. So I just wanted to point that out. So the way the existing zoning bylaw works is that the environmental zone that is associated with the woodlot and valley land is able to be amended or revised without an amendment to the zoning bylaw, given the submission of the appropriate technical study. So as I mentioned, we've completed a geotechnical stable top of slope survey. We had done a field staking with the NPCA back last year. Having submitted the application in the fall with new staff members, they were confident with that original staked location. Earlier this winter, in January, we went back out with the NPCA and redelineated that stable top of slope. Similarly, the limit of the significant woodlot at the back was staked and surveyed with the Niagara Regional environmental staff. So the culmination of those 2 reports and studies really results in the rear lot setback or rear lot line that we've proposed here today. And we'll get into the variances in a minute, but generally speaking, based on the detailed studies provided, it is appropriate to move forward with a proposed development of the property. The existing zoning permits semi-detached dwellings as a permitted use as of right. And so that's what we're looking to create these additional 2 lots for those future semi-detached dwellings. So I do have some further points on the variance, but I'll hold those back. But yes, happy to answer any questions the committee may have. I would say overall we are agreeable with the conditions of approval. and don't have any issues. They're mostly the recommendations of the EIS report and the other applicable comments from staff. I would say the one condition I do have a bit of an issue with is the requirement for an NPCA work permit. They were given several opportunities to provide comments if one was required or not, and they did not provide that. So I'll leave it to the committee's discretion whether or not that ought to be included, but in my opinion, it should not. But that being said, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them and go into further detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hycoop. Could I ask for clarification on what you were just saying at the end about the NPCA work permit comment? They didn't, did they provide is it that they didn't respond to requests, or they said something about the conditions specifically? I just want to make sure I understood your comments.
So what happened was in the fall of 23, when we submitted our application, it reflected an original physical top of slope staking that we had completed. After we submitted our application, we had received comments from the NPCA that questioned that physical top of slope staking location. There had been a new staff member that had come on board since that time. They wanted to restake it as they had a difference of opinion with the former staff member. We went through that exercise. Their original comments provided back in the fall and their subsequent comments just noted no objection. Their most recent comments noted no objection. They didn't list any conditions or requirements associated with any future work permits or anything of that nature. So, and that correspondence is in the report also.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions for Mr. Hycoop?
I have no questions.
None.
Okay, nothing else for me for now, Mr. Hycoop. If you don't mind just taking a seat, I'll invite anyone else in the room who would like to speak to this matter. Come on up. Thank you, and start with your name, please.
If you could just turn on the microphone, it will turn green at the top. Perfect, thank you.
Is red?
Yep, you're
Okay.
good.
Okay, hi, my name is Karen Buckley, and I just want to say a few things about this woodlot. Canada's climate goal is zero emissions by 2050 and to reduce national greenhouse gas emissions by 40% relative to 2005 levels by 2030. Forests, including the carbon, remove a lot of carbon. An acre of trees will absorb about 5,732 pounds of carbon dioxide each year, which is about the size of this lot. The woodlot of 201 Canberra Road plays a significant role in helping Pelham to be an active participant in reaching the 2030 goals if the woodlot remains intact. The trees in the woodlot of 2001 Canberra are a rare habitat known as Carolinian forest here in Canada, and it's an important habitat of the Greenbelt. The town of Pelham has shown regard for this woodlot and these Carolinian trees in the past at least 3 times to my knowledge since I've lived here in Pelham, as the area has been developed. When the tall high-rises and apartments on Highway 20 behind this forest were built, the council decided to not build too close to the slope to protect the woodlot. And although that little note, I guess, should be for the next variance. Also in the past decade, the council again showed concern to protect this woodlot with this decision to spray for the gypsy moths, to protect these trees for many years to avoid losing these trees, and to maintain the health of the forest. The third example that the town council has shown concern for over the health of this forest was when this exact property was sold a few years ago. There was a stipulation for the sale of this property that the entire property for 201 Canberra Road, that any changes to the buildings that would be built would not exceed the total area that was currently there at the time of sale. A concern here is that Lot 4 is within the hazardous land, which is not to be developed as it's zoned currently, and a lot is being created within that forest to be developed. By subdividing this property into 4 pieces, I'm wondering, first off, if gentle intensification is really only changing this property from 3 low-income housing units to 4 most likely high-income houses. And secondly, by subdividing this property into 4, I'm wondering, asking you as representatives of the town of Pelham, will you uphold past precedent to protect this woodlot that is on this forest and to divide the total area for the buildings that were allowed amongst only lots 1, 2, and 3 and not for lot 4, which is down within the ravine that's surrounded by this forest? I ask you to show leadership here today and to care for meeting the goals of both the Canadian government and to not have tunnel vision for only one goal or target, which is currently the target of the housing goals for the province. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Ms. Buckley. Any questions or comments for the presenter?
I have no questions, thank you.
None.
Yeah, I have none either. Thank you very much for
So
those
the
thoughts.
question is, is the total area going to be changed from what it was currently, like the houses that are currently there, to these two new townhouses that are being built? So what was the area before, and what is the area planned to be built? Because that was the stipulations on purchasing this property on MLS.ca by the town of Pelham.
Yeah, so this committee, we have to make our determinations on Planning Act consents, and I'm not sure, and maybe we can invite the proponent, the applicant, to speak a bit more to that side of it.
You may know that, right?
Typically, we, if there's arrangements or contractual arrangements or what's put out through a real estate listing, it's separate from what this committee can do in terms of decision-making. We have to decide whether or not, to the tests under the Act, whether or not it makes sense to subdivide the lot, to create these lots based on what the Planning Act tells us we can do and what we can look at. So I will ask the applicant for more information about that, because I am curious as well to respond to those comments. So I very much appreciate that, and I've clearly heard your comments around the value of the woodlot and the lots as they are now and the future use. So I will be asking the applicant some questions relating to that as well. So thank you. And you're welcome to take a seat now, and I'll invite anyone else in the room who would like to speak to this as well. Thank you. Come on up. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sophie wants to speak.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't appreciate that. Yes.
I entered her too.
Okay, yes, please go ahead. I'm very sorry. I didn't know you weren't.
Hi, my name is Sophie. My house is on the forest or ravine that touches this property. During COVID, this forest became my playground and place to go when I was upset or troubled during these tough years. I fell in love with a tree in the ravine. My neighbor allows me to go on her section of the forest to be at this tree when I just need to get away. Adults, like parents and doctors, are always saying that being in nature is important for kids' mental health. And I'm really upset that you are thinking of doing things to the ravine that may affect the health of my special tree. Please consider kids like myself and the bad effect it will have on kids and future children of Pelham.
Thanks very much, Sophie. That was very insightful. Thank you for coming and telling us your views and how you use the forest as well. It really gives us a good perspective on the importance of these lands that we might not otherwise appreciate. So thanks for saying that and for your comment. Okay, I think there were others who wished to speak to this as well. Come on forward. Thank you.
Speakers on, I guess. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're neighbors of the proposed property. We live across the street, Brian Young and Angela McRae. We have some concerns about this development going on. In our mind, it seems like it's a little bit too much intensification for this particular area on Canberra Road. So we had a list of, things that we would like answered a little bit more before, we feel it's okay to go ahead with this development. One of them is, apparently this development is going to be using a private sewage system. It's not a town-owned sewage system, and it's going to be using what they call a forced main. This is where sewage is pumped up the road to the first manhole. And this forced main system involves many check valves and whatnot to keep the sewage going in the proper direction.
It is uphill.
Uphill. So our concern is, you know, who's going to be maintaining these check valves? Are we going to be someday get flooded out with sewage coming down the road? Like, is this a town thing that's going to take care of, or being a private system, is it a private system? And do we have to rely on the people that live across the street in maintaining their system? So that was one of our concerns. The other concern that we had was, we live on Canberra Road. Canberra Road is quite a fast road. It's posted at 50K an hour, but regularly cars go on there, 80K an hour. They come down off the hill there, and they're just zooming, a lot of them.
Or they come up from Effingham, because there's the stop sign in Effingham, and they come zooming, and they fly by.
Anyways, you know, they're not doing 50. They're doing a lot more than 50. The little narrow driveway that we're dealing with here in this new development, single car garage, there's no room to turn around. The cars are going to have to be backing out of their driveway onto Canberra Road.
All of them, there's going to be 4.
To me, it's an accident waiting to happen. You know, most of the houses along Canberra have a way to turn around within their driveway somewhere, so they're driving out of their driveway. Try backing into your driveway. That's even worse. People don't know what's going on when that happens. Cars behind you,
Start honking.
they don't understand what you're doing, you know, so that's another accident waiting to happen. So to me, there needs to be some room in this property to have cars to be able to turn around and come out face first.
That's the way the property is currently structured.
Yeah, there's lots of room to turn around. You know, it's a huge turnaround area within there. So that's a big change that will be happening with this new development. So we're quite concerned about that. The other one that we're wondering about is, you know, there's going to be a lot of asphalt now suddenly out near the road. What happens with snow clearing, okay? There's a lot of snow banks that are a pain to deal with, and there's not a lot of room to put the snow. Is it all going to go into the ditch? And then what happens once the ditch is full of snow? It's going to overflow onto the road and then come across the street and affect us in some way. Right now, the ditch culvert underneath that driveway is not working correctly. All the water's coming out over the top of the driveway, eroding the curb, eroding the shoulder.
Yes, and that could actually be repaired by the town, you know, now.
So we can see what happens once the ditch is full of snow in the wintertime, because there's nowhere to put it. There's not enough yard to put the snow. And water starts overflowing into the road. Big problem. The setback from the top of the slope, I think that should remain the same. Whatever they're proposing to change it to, I don't know if I would agree with that. I think that those houses should be back as far back as from the slope as possible. We live across the street. We have a slope in the back of our place. It's all sand, okay? Any water on that slope and it runs. You end up with everything down the valley. It's something that we experience firsthand. And loose sand with rainwater running off will run into the valley. And it's hard to control once it happens. Once a channel starts in the sand, it's pretty hard to.
It's permanent.
It's pretty hard to get around that. And
You didn't say it should be maintained at 7.5 meters.
7.5 meters is what they're recommending, and I guess they want a variance to reduce that. So that's a problem. The other one is the single car driveways have no provisions for any kind of visitors, okay? Like, where are any visitors to these properties gonna park, you know? Canberra Road is not a great road to park on. There's a ditch on one side. The other side is, you know, grass and
Mr. DeHaan's property.
Mr. DeHaan's property. It's a bit of a problem, you know? Parking on Canberra is not a thing to do, you know? You don't hardly see it anywhere along Canberra. No one parks on Canberra. And stormwater runoff, yeah, that's the other one. You know, that was a concern when we had the build next door to us at 190 Canberra, and they addressed it. They went out of their way and they spent a lot of money to address it with a super tank.
A huge system.
And, you know, they really engineered it right, but what are we dealing with here? Where's the stormwater runoff going to go on this property? Is it all going to go down the valley, or is it coming across the ditch and maybe across the street? So we have a lot of concerns with stormwater runoff. So I think that's about it. Sorry about that. My first time addressing a committee meeting, sorry. A little bit nervous. Anyways,
Yeah.
that's my concerns, yeah, so.
Thank you very much, and I wouldn't know it was your first time, because I think you've provided a very thoughtful list of items that concern you, so we, of course, welcome those comments. I want to invite the committee to ask any questions. Mr. Young.
I have no questions, thank you.
None.
I don't have anything either. I will ask the applicant, and we'll come back to some of the questions and comments that you had as well, so thank you for those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the room who would like to speak to this matter?
So the red light is on. My name's Nora Pete, and just as a technical matter, I'd like to suggest to the committee in general that I really like the questions that the committee has to answer in terms of whether or not it's suitable to grant a variance. And I would suggest that in future submissions for variances, you add those conditions that you must consider to the literature that you send out to us plebes, because it would give us a good way to consider the application in terms of the kinds of questions you need to answer. So it's just a technical suggestion. I've been an editor much of my life, so that's where that comes from. What I will say is that my family purchased the adjoining property in 1953, and we have owned it since. I think there will be nobody in this room or probably in the area who knows that property and how it functions better than I do. And I don't know, first of all, I would agree with Mr. Young's comments about the traffic. The proposed driveways are just over the crest of the hill as you start down into Ridgeville. And the traffic does go very fast down there. You absolutely will have accidents. There's no question about that. I'm already seeing problems across the road on the property that was developed into 4 townhouses over the last couple of years. I'm already hearing brakes being slammed on as people come up there with traffic turning out there, because there were 14 buildings added, most of them with 2 cars, some with 3. And again, that's just over the top of the rise. And so you come up the hill and you don't see them turning out there until you're over the top. In this case, you're going the other direction, and you're not going to see those people turning out until it's too late to not hit them. And as Mr. Young says, there is absolutely no place you could not park on the side of Canberra Road there. To the east, occasionally people park on the side of Canberra Road, and that already impedes traffic. Generally, they're parked more or less across from the new 14 townhouses. And that's definitely a navigation and a safety problem to traffic. I wanted to ask Mr. Highcoop, is it? Would you be able to
ma'am.
put your photograph?
Ma'am, you have to speak through the chair, please, and I can ask
I
for it.
would like to ask him if he could put the photograph of that property up on the screen for us
We could
again?
pull up something like that, yes. Is there
Yeah.
something within the presentation, a slide that Mr. Highcoop had in his presentation that you're looking for?
Yes, it would be addressing
Okay.
some of his points. One of
do
the real problems here, I think, is in fact drainage. And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could you please ask him to put that photograph back up on the screen for me?
I think we're working on it, or staff are working on it to pull up the
okay,
presentation again for you. We'll pull it up on the screen for you.
Okay. There was development done on Highway 20 many years ago where the drainage wasn't adequately addressed, and now most of one whole hillside has washed down into the valley, including into the the back wood lot of the property under consideration. The sand there now is this deep. And on this particular property, it's not quite as deep because it's spread out more because it was a flatter land, not so hilly. So the runoff is intense. The soil is really sandy. There it's all sand or sandy loam. Let me just go to the picture and show you. Not that one, the photograph. Sorry, can you get the photograph?
The second slide.
Okay. All of this, where it's brown, this is runoff from over here.
Sorry, ma'am, if you're not speaking into the microphone, you won't be on record. So if you could just direct your comments into the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
The brown areas shown there, that's all sand runoff from development on Highway 20. And it's been accumulating for some time, but it's there and it's done a huge amount of damage in that property, the property under consideration, and 3 properties over. So my point is that when you're considering building something that changes the drainage on a vulnerable piece of property, you need to be really careful because it is a big problem. Now, relative to that as well, the existing houses are already set very close to the edge of the tableland, in other words, the edge of the gully. And I gather that there is part of the variance is to vary the slope that's at the back of the existing houses. There's the existing houses, then there's quite a steep drop, maybe 15 feet. Then there's a roadway that's been in use for 80, 90, 100 years. Then there's another drop. I would submit that if the slope is disturbed that's immediately behind the houses, you will have a runoff situation similar to the one that you see here. I don't think it can be avoided. The other issues I have with drainage also have to do with drainage out onto Canberra Road. When it rains, there's already a river that runs down that hill from the crest of the hill on Canberra right down into Effingham. That, I mean, you can get runoff, you know, a river this wide, and it will completely erode that side of the road. And Canberra Road was just rebuilt not that many years ago. It's already washing out from runoff there, and the drainage won't help from the new houses. Part of that problem being that much of that property now is grass or grass and trees, which, because it's sand, absorbs the water. The water drops down to the water table rather than running down the road. So when you have it entirely covered with a house and driveway, paved driveway, you're going to have many times the problem. Let's see. So with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, your decision may be, do these applications fit the terms of our bylaws and whatever we have to work under? But I think that I didn't know if there was a requirement in the original sale of the property to limit development to the square footage of the buildings now existing. But if there is, then I think that that's a legal problem that the committee also needs to consider. The other thing that I would say that I think is pretty critical is that we have heard a great deal about what they call moral injury through COVID and subsequently. And there's a general agreement now, although there probably should have been for several thousand years, that if people are required to function in a situation that sustains moral injury, that we have an obligation to change that, to improve that. And I would submit that it's a moral injury on the part of a town. It's inflicting a moral injury on the part of the town to grant a variance where what you have now is 3 houses, and 2 of them, one of them I think is empty, 2 of them are housing, in one case, a single-parent family, and in the other case, a multi-generational family that includes 4 small children, 1 an infant. Fonthill is full, Pelham is full of houses that are expensive. All of the ones just built across the road are $1 million and more. And I think it inflicts moral injury on all of us collectively, not just the families who are presently there. If we remove housing that is affordable and occupied by people who are not wealthy in this town, and replace it with townhouses that are going to be far more expensive. And in that matter, I would point out that this is a small thing and it may not be something you can consider. On the drawing that shows the, check here, that shows the town lands coming between what's, I think, Part 1 and Part 2, the farthest east and the second over. It shows that as being the town boundary. And I can tell you that the only reason that is the town boundary is that when the gravel pit was opened up on Highway 20, the well on that property went mostly dry. And that was a well that had sustained the property for, best part of 100 years. And at that time, the owners applied to the town because the next door property, the next east property, was on town water. That's a whole other story. But they applied to the town to be included in the town boundary so that town water could be expended to that property specifically. So I think saying that we can put 4 townhouses on these 2 lots because it's within the town boundaries is a little bit specious. And I will point out that some people have talked about 2 townhouses. We're actually talking about 4 townhouses plus the existing one left on Part 3, is it, or Part 4? And I have one question, which is that, do I gather that the plan attached showed a carve-out for road allowance? And do I gather that that's now no longer being requested? And if so, what was it about in the first place, and what's the change about?
We can respond to that. If you're done your other comments, I'm happy to turn to staff to answer that question.
Yeah, I am done my other comments, and I would urge you to consider that we have lots of development in this town that is high-priced and dense. And in this particular location, I think would be folly. And that's not just because I live beside the property. There's a good fence, lots of space. That's not the problem. It's very poorly considered for the property as it exists.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Clearly very well thought out as well. Maybe we'll just take a pause to ask staff the question about why it is, because I was also curious, why is there no longer a road widening required? How'd that come to be?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the section between Canberra Road from Victoria to Highway 20 used to be a regional road. It was assumed by the town in the year 2000, and at that time, the region, since it's a major route for most of the traffic, they were taking widening, and the town is obviously continuing it when we assumed it. That's the reason why it has like a lot of parcels that have took widening already.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, historically there was some widenings while it was a regional road. It's no longer a regional road. There's not a need anymore for the road widening. It's in the taking. Did I understand that, or is that not accurate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that's correct.
That's right. Okay. Okay, so I think this is, I mean, as we've heard, it's usually kind of a technical matter for transportation, for traffic reasons, that municipalities, either the upper tier municipality or lower tier municipality, will make decisions about acquiring roads where it's deemed appropriate, where it meets their transportation plans, and for other reasons as well. So I hope that helps to answer that component of what we were talking about. And okay, and I think, ma'am, as well, it was because it was a recent change and a bit of confusion about that. That happens from time to time, but I think we have clarity now as well what the intention is, what the application is for. Will not be for Part 3. So the retained portion of the land, the ask of this committee is that the remnant lands go all the way to the street and wouldn't include that road widening at the front. Is there anyone else here who has comments, who would like to speak? Doesn't look like it. Is there anyone online, Ms. Leach, who was registered or would like to speak to this?
There's no one pre-registered online to speak, and it is 5:25 p.m. We've received no emails with regard to the subject applications.
Okay, thank you. I did want to invite Mr. Rowe back before we. Sorry, I'm still thinking of the last application. Mr. Hycoop, thank you. So come on up, please. I made a very, what I think is a detailed list of the comments that I heard. And maybe, and I anticipate that you have as well. So I'll invite you to speak to what you heard, and then I'll probably have additional questions as well. But I did have a starting question, which is there anything registered on title? Is there a restrictive covenant? Is there anything that is registered that restricts development on these lands?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, I asked my client, and the land was not purchased from the town of Pelham, and they're not aware of any restrictive covenants or clauses in the purchase and sale agreement that had that limitation. So unfortunately, I can't speak to that matter. My opinion, and as it relates to this application, my opinion is that is a legal dispute between two property owners. If someone had that understanding, or if there was a clause in a purchase and sale agreement, it's a civil matter that would need to be litigated out. But based on what I know and what information I have, I'm not aware of anything of that nature.
Okay. And sorry, I just want to be really clear with this as well. Is there anything registered on title? I think you were speaking to mostly an agreement, like a purchase agreement. Are you aware of anything registered on title? Did you look at title as part of your review?
I do not have that information handy, so I'm not aware of anything on.
Okay. Okay. Any questions based on those questions that I asked? No. Okay. So I'll invite you, Mr. Hycoop, to hear.
I'm actually at your
response.
disposal, Mr. Chair. If you'd prefer to approach it in a specific way, otherwise I'll just kind of walk through the comments.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Why don't you do that, Mr. Hykoop, and then I will see what's missed, what additional questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, based on the notes taken, there is a significant concern for the woodlot and the associated valley land. So as I indicated, we, as part of this application, we prepared an environmental impact study that was done by Terrastory Environmental Consulting. Tristan Knight there is the principal ecologist who prepared this report. The report does conclude that the woodland and the valley land are significant wildlife habitat. There's absolutely no dispute on that. So what we're required to do from a policy and regulation perspective is to ensure that we are not negatively impacting that woodlot feature. So as part of this environmental impact study process, there's a requirement to attend the site with regional environmental planning staff. The region regulates the woodlot feature, and as outlined in the staff report and in the environmental impact study, there's a number of recommendations associated with this proposal to ensure that through this process, the woodlot is not impacted. So those things include tree plantings, silt fencing, the appropriate measures to ensure that that woodlot is not impacted. So that drip line that was surveyed with the Niagara region and that is outlined on our consent sketch and in our concept severance plan that UCC prepared, the proposed severance lines are outside of that woodlot regulated area. So therefore, we are not impacting that woodlot. Secondly, as it relates to the valley land component, we prepared a geotechnical stable top of slope assessment. Soil Mat Engineering, a qualified geotechnical engineer, did an analysis on the slope and concluded that the slope is stable in the long term. As I indicated in my initial presentation, there was a little bit of difference of opinion between MPCA staff members. Originally, the physical top of slope was thought to be a little bit further north than it is now based on the proposal. So we've actually, through the course of submitting the application in the fall, getting some feedback from the MPCA, went and redid that mapping exercise and revised our application to ensure that the MPCA was satisfied with the proposed lot line. So that proposed lot line is now outside of the physical top of slope as well. So our proposed application has no impact on the woodlot and the associated habitat, and similarly on the valley slope as it relates to the geotechnical component of ensuring that erosion and the appropriate load-bearing capacity is there to support the proposed dwellings. So I will point out at this point in time that the proposed dwellings are closer to the road than the existing dwellings. So from my perspective, this application actually has a positive impact on the woodlot as it pulls the dwellings farther away from the existing trees, and therefore allows a larger separation from the wooded area to where the residential area is today. I think another thing that this application does is it does not further fragment that feature. So if you can recall in my presentation or when you're looking at the consent sketch, you can see that the proposed dwellings do not run north all the way to the back of the existing property. So that's another major component to ensure that there's no fence lines that would follow lot lines that would break up that feature otherwise. So from my perspective, that addresses the woodlot and valley land components. Maybe I'll take a pause there, Mr. Chair, if there's any further questions you or the committee have on those two items.
Thank you, Mr. Hykoop. No questions from me.
So I just wanted to clarify in terms of the existing footprint of the buildings on Parts 1 and Part 2, these new dwellings will be located out of the valley, further from the valley than what the existing homes are now. Is that what you said?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that is correct. All right.
Continue, yes, thank you.
If I may, thank you. So there's been some questions about the stormwater management and the servicing of the property. So yes, the subject lands will need to be serviced through a force main system. So that is very similar to the other dwellings on the opposite and recent developments on the opposite side of Canberra Road. That would be a town facility, as the existing sanitary sewer on Canberra Road runs out of grade. As you know, this portion of Canberra Road drops in grade as you head to the west. So the only way to service it without completely reconstructing a sanitary sewer system throughout this area of town is to accommodate it by way of a force main. So that's a similar situation that Upper Canada has designed on the south side of Canberra Road. And so we'd be tying into the existing manhole. That's a pretty typical engineering solution for these types of situations where the lots do not have enough grade to service them via a gravity sewer. So that is just the nature of what it is. Doing force mains is permitted in these types of circumstances, and there are a number of conditions outlined that require us to install those and ensure they're functional and operational prior to being able to proceed. In regards to stormwater management, the property has a very large impervious surface right now. As you are likely aware, there's 3 existing dwellings and a 4th accessory garage structure. The front yard area of this property is heavily asphalted, and there's very little green space on the existing property. Right now, the bulk of the asphalt area actually drains to the roadside ditch on Canberra Road, whereas the existing dwellings, the roofs, and the area surrounding the existing dwellings drains sheet drainage off the back of the slope. So with this proposed development, we'll be required to prepare and provide the Town Public Works Department with a lot grading and drainage plan, demonstrating that the lots and the drainage don't have a negative impact on the surrounding properties. I can't speak to the specifics of the grading design at this point in time, but generally speaking, we have a high point in the middle of the proposed dwellings. So basically meaning the front yard area drains to the front and the rear yard area drains to the rear. So that would follow a similar way of drainage that the site actually has now. A lot of the site goes off the valley land to the back, and the asphalt area at the front goes to the roadside ditch. So we would maintain a similar drainage pattern. I can't speak to the long-term impacts of whether or not Canberra Road would be constructed with a storm sewer. That's something that's a little bit out of individual development application purview. But at this point in time, it's about an equal impervious area pre to post development, and the appropriate grading and drainage can be handled in a similar manner to the existing scenario. Maybe I'll take another pause there if you would like. If not, I could keep going and talk about traffic.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted, as a matter of clarification, when you're speaking about force main. So tell me if this is correct. This is my understanding. Force main is a mechanism to push the sewage uphill, and you can't. There's instances of this all over Southern Ontario where you can't use gravity. You got to push it. And what happens? What are the requirements between what's built by the applicant, what's built by the owner, and then what happens when it's taken over by the municipality? Maybe you could just help clarify that for me.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. It's simply a matter of maintenance. The long-term ensuring that facility continues to operate in an acceptable manner. So associated with that facility would be a pump chamber pit and the appropriate valves, backflow preventers, those kind of things to ensure that there's the ability for a pump to grind up the sewage and push it through a smaller tube that then gets deposited into the manhole and into the gravity system. So the difference between a private force main system and a public one is really just the maintenance of that system long term. So given that there are several existing force mains and pumps in this area to accommodate the development to the south and some of the other residential lots, I really don't see it as a burdensome component of this development, as there's quite a few of those existing situations in this immediate area. So if they're already maintaining the existing force main, it's right there across the street.
Thank you. Any questions? What was covered recently?
None.
Okay.
In regards to traffic in the driveways, so this Canberra Road does have a speed limit on it. Yes, it is a collector road, which generally has more traffic on it, but within posted speed limits, I can't control, nor can this committee, and it's really an enforcement issue if people are speeding up and down Canberra Road. It's something that's a little bit outside of our control. I would submit, though, that we do meet the town's parking requirements by providing a spot in the driveway and a spot in the garage, which is sufficient for this development. We are required to get driveway entrance permits for the new proposed culverts that would be designed and sized to appropriately convey the existing flow. So that's would be my submissions based on the traffic component. I know anecdotally a lot of people don't believe that is enough parking, but the rules that we're dealing with and that we abide by are outlined in the zoning bylaw, and we are meeting that requirement. Let's try to see here if there's other issues that I haven't addressed. We talked about the road widening.
Mr. Haiku, I have a couple on my list, so maybe
Sure,
you can
certainly.
you can go with these ones. There was a comment about snow clearing and where snow will go, how it will drain, and somewhat related to that is stormwater flow as it relates to the road. I think you talked about the property, but could you speak about those two relationships which somewhat overlap, and then I have an additional question as well after that.
Well, I think it's somewhat related to my previous comment where we have to get a driveway entrance permit and new culverts associated with that. So those culverts would be sized and approved by the Town Public Works Department to ensure that water isn't impeded by the new driveways and can freely flow where gravity takes it. As it relates to snow plowing, I can't control where the town's maintenance crews deposit the snow. But I would suggest there is this circumstance along the entirety of Canberra Road. There's about 5 or 6 meters from the existing property line to the paved portion of Canberra Road, which is quite a distance. Typically, you would see snow go maybe 8-10 feet from the side of the road. So we're talking 2 to 3 meters. There's the ditch that is there, and then there's additional space behind it. So from my perspective, it would continue to operate as it does now. The culverts would be sized to convey the flows. As the snow piles up and eventually melts, it would go down that existing ditch. We will be making improvements to that ditch as we construct the new driveways and install those culverts. We'll need to make sure that the ditch is sufficient depth based on the size of those culverts. So that's something that we'll be looking through the detailed design stage at. But as it relates directly to snow storage space, I'm of the opinion that there's enough room to provide that along the side of the road between the paved portion and the property line.
Thank you for those comments. Any comments on my question?
Yes. This one doesn't want to work.
The light doesn't go on.
There you go.
We haven't addressed the one issue that I find most disquieting is this property is just over the crest of a hill, as someone pointed out, and this is a driveway arrangement that you have to back out onto a busy street, quite busy street. And to me, this doesn't seem like an optimal solution for that piece of property. This is a country home. If it's occupied by two people, there will likely be two vehicles. So the amount of backing out onto Canberra Road, which is a road I use frequently, I think the presenters here have made an extremely good point. This is an accident waiting to happen. And I find it really disquieting that because the bylaw says we have to provide parking for two vehicles, one inside and one in the driveway, it's not working here on this steeply graded piece of property. Can we do something about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the grade does drop along here, but it doesn't drop to the extent that it's a significant drop in a short amount of time. It's more of a gradual drop that goes for, I would say, at least several hundred meters, if not half a kilometer, if not longer, all the way down to Effingham. So when you stand in the driveway, as I have many times, and looked either way, I feel that there's appropriate sight lines to be able to see either way. Typically on a 50-kilometer road, you're looking at a sight line somewhere in 60 to 75 meters. In this instance, I don't have an exact measurement for you, but off the top of my head, it's definitely well over 100 meters. So if people are going the speed limit, I'm of the opinion that there's a sufficient sight lines to ensure that you can see vehicles coming and going in either direction.
So what you're saying is there's no other solution to deal with how you handle getting on and off of those properties?
Well, the only other solution would be to entirely pave the front yard with a driveway to provide turning around facilities. That's something that, from a planning perspective, is not desirable from a streetscape perspective. We'd like to include boulevard tree plantings at the front of the property, and we're meeting streetscape objectives by pulling the houses closer to the front property line. And just from a visual perspective, you don't want to create a streetscape that has a lineup of cars. So by having some driveway space, some green space, the ability to have a tree, you create a much more suitable environment that has some green space in the front area.
Okay, no, I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Rodbard and Mr. Highcoop. I wanted to ask about the urban boundary. There were a couple comments about that. Urban boundary, goes right to the edge of where these properties are going. What does that mean? What is permitted in the urban boundary? It's not permitted outside the urban boundary. What do the planning documents tell us about that?
So yeah, the land to the west, the existing dwelling that is to be retained, is zoned as a specialty agricultural area. So associated with that urban boundary is a clear differentiation between urban and rural policies. So under an urban policy objective and mandate, infilling and intensification is mandated by the provincial government. That percolates through all the local municipal documents, including the regional official plan, Town of Pelham official plan. And that's why the zoning allows the proposed use of the two semi-detached dwellings, 4 units total, but yes, 2 semi-detached dwellings. And so if you're inside of that urban area, there's a mandate to use that land as efficiently as possible to ensure that municipal services, property tax assessment rates, all those kind of things are done in a manner to create a complete community, and that includes the town's ability to provide services for its citizens. So that overarching policy objective is really why we're here today. It allows us to make application for the proposed development in a manner that conforms to those policies. However, on the flip side of that, the rural designation is actually quite the opposite. It discourages further severances or intensification. It indicates that we are to not develop those properties in a manner that would be similar to an urban scenario, so that the function of those properties long-term can remain as existing in a legal non-conforming status, or can eventually maybe one day be assembled and be part of an agricultural property. Now, in this instance, the rear of the property is that woodlot and the valley land, so there isn't really much agricultural use there. But that being said, the limit of that urban boundary line does not permit further development on that westerly half. As it relates to servicing and engineering as it relates to urban boundaries, rural or urban land, urban properties are required to be serviced through municipal services, i.e. water through a water main and lateral sewer through a sanitary sewer connected into the town system. However, rural properties are not permitted to connect to them, so they have to have a well or a cistern, or they have to have a septic system like the existing dwelling that is proposed to remain has. So those are, from a planning and engineering perspective, the high-level differences between what you can do in or outside of the urban area.
Thank you. Any comments, questions on my question? I think that takes me to the end of my list. Anything you wish to add, Mr. Haiku?
I would suggest that the property and the development in front of you here today is really an exercise of tenureship. The proposal in front of you could be brought forward through a site plan agreement process, and we could develop the property in a manner that we are proposing without your approval. But what we are seeking for your approval tonight is the ability for those properties to be privately owned. So at this point in time, before we get into the variance discussion, I think that's really what we're looking for, is the ability for these semi-detached dwellings to be constructed and sold separately. Contrary to some of the comments that we received, these dwellings are not very large. The smallest one is at 850 square feet of an envelope. The largest one is just over 1,000 square feet. As not a significantly sized dwelling that would be something that a luxury homeowner would seek to purchase. Will they be more expensive than perhaps the existing dwellings that are on the property? Certainly. But to say that they're going to be exactly the same as what the high-end townhouse development is across the street, that would not be the case. So those would be my submissions, Mr. Chair. We're looking for the approval here to be able to develop this property in a manner that allows private tenureship, and to do so that would provide additional dwelling units for and houses for people down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Haiku. Before you go, I wanted to probe your comment about if you were proceeding through site plan only and not seeking consent and variances. Could you explain that a little bit further? What would you mean by that? Is that because of the existing uses, the existing nonconformity, it looks like? Could you explain that?
Yeah, so the existing zoning permits existing uses, or the proposed uses rather, sorry. So the zoning allows for semi-detached dwellings, it allows for single detached dwellings. So we are able, under a different section of the Planning Act, to develop the property through site plan control. And so what that would look like is we would come forward with a development application different than a severance application. It would be a site plan application that would be dealt with through staff on its own merits, including the similar details such as the environmental impact study, the geotechnical study, the functional servicing report, all those different components. So from my perspective, we've addressed those appropriate requirements. Yes, there are conditions of approval, but the site plan process would be a more fulsome process that would address those requirements. However, the nature of Section 53, the Planning Act, the severance section, is that there's a conditional approval given to consents with conditions associated to fulfill once you have the certainty that that tenureship is permitted. So that's what we're looking to do here, is to provide that private tenureship. If we don't receive the approval tonight, we will ultimately be looking to develop it through site plan control and would have to develop it as rentals. We would have the opportunity to condominiumize it, but that would have to be a separate process as well. And the condominium process for the individual homeowner is much less desirable.
Thank you. Any comments from the committee? Okay. I don't think there's anything else from me either. So thank you, Mr. Highcoop. I think that, well, maybe I'll ask you again, Ms. Leach. Anyone online? Anything received by email?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, we do not have any pre-registered speakers, and it is 5:54 p.m. We've received no emails.
Okay. Motion to close the public portion of the meeting.
Motion to close the public portion of the meeting.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
I had a hand up there.
Yeah, no, I think at this point, we've closed the public portion of the meeting, and we will proceed. I think we've heard from everyone in the room. Any committee comments? Any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Anything to talk about here?
I don't think I can approve this. I don't like this.
Sorry, Mr. Rodbard, why don't you
I have
say your comments?
a serious issue with the parking arrangements, the driveway arrangements, and for that reason, I don't feel I can approve this.
Okay, thank you. Anything from Stan? No. So I think this is a difficult one to consider. This is a property which is in the urban boundary, and there's contemplation for this kind of use in the urban boundary. And as we see, the use is allowed, the parking amount is allowed. I do have some hesitation based on what we've heard and what we talked about, as my friend has said here. But nonetheless, there's nothing sought to change the requirements for what the parking is for what's needed under the parking requirements. I also note that there was a lot of work, and I've read through the reports from Niagara Region, from NPCA, from Pelham as well, looking at the drip line, looking at the top of slope, looking at the existing conditions, and I have no reason to doubt the conclusions that they arrived at in terms of their observations as it relates to the woodlot, as it relates to runoff, those kinds of things as well. So, while I have some hesitations with it, I do think it satisfies the requirements under the Planning Act as it relates to granting for consent. So I don't share the view of my friend. I do think that I would support this consent application. So with that, I don't know if we have a motion, a stand in relation to this or not.
No, I can do the motion, that's fine.
Okay.
So files B4 2024P and B5 2024B for 201 Canberra Road in Pelham, applications for consent, partial discharge of mortgage and convey Part 1, and a partial discharge of mortgage and convey Part 2 is hereby granted. The above decision is subject to the following conditions to the satisfaction of Public Works. Confirm that no existing utilities cross the proposed new property line. Submit an overall lot grading and drainage plan. 2 units in the proposed Part 1 and Part 2 lots are to be individually serviced with its own sanitary and water connections if permitted. This work is to be done by the owner at the owner's expense and will require a temporary works permit. Should these services cross property lines, Public Works will not support the consent to sever. These works are to be completed prior to consent, and the applicant shall bear all costs associated with these works. Locate cards are to be provided to the town once works are complete. Submit a site servicing plan. A construction of new or modification of existing driveways requires a driveway entrance permit. To the satisfaction of planning, that the applicant sign the Town of Pelham Standard Memorandum of Understanding explaining that development charges and cash in lieu of the dedication of land for park purposes are required prior to the issuance of a building permit. That the applicant enter into a development agreement with the town for Parts 1, Part 2, and Part 4 to ensure that all recommendations of the environmental impact study dated November 29th, 2023, as outlined in the planning report, are implemented. That the prescribed archaeological advisory clause be inserted in the development agreement between the landowner and the town of Pelham. That final approval of all necessary zoning approvals be obtained for Part 1 and Part 2 through the approval of minor variance applications A6 and A7 2024P. To the satisfaction of the Secretary Treasurer, that the Secretary Treasurer be provided with a legal description and the certification fee of $436. That's the right amount, right? This decision is based on the following reasons. The application conforms to and complies with the town's official plan, the town's zoning bylaw, the regional policy plan, and the provincial policy statement. This decision is rendered having regard to sections 5124 and 5125 of the Planning Act. The committee considered all written and oral submissions and finds that, subject to the conditions, this application meets Planning Act criteria, is consistent, and complies with provincial, regional, and town planning policy. The applicant is aware that no side yard walkways that impede side yard swales are permitted, and that the town does not allow any service connections for Part 4 as it is not within the urban boundary. The applicant is aware that any proposed development will require NPCA approval and possible work permits.
Yes, I see that we've included the NPCA permit condition, which I'm prepared to support as well. So I will second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, that does bring us to the associated minor variances, being A6 and file A7. I would just ask Jody to please share a presentation. Excerpt from planning report. The subject parcels, shown as Parts 1 and Part 2 on the sketch, have a frontage of 13.66 meters on the north side of Canberra Road, lying south of Highway 20. The applications seek relief from Section 6.2.3, requesting a minimum rear yard setback of 5.75 meters, whereas a minimum rear yard setback of 7.5 meters is required, and Section 6.2.3, requesting a minimum rear yard setback of 4.5 meters, whereas a minimum rear yard setback of 7.5 meters is required. And just for clarity, this presentation is the two files together. To date, the following comments have been received from the Building Division. Building permit approval is required for the proposed semi-detached dwellings. Public Works, please be advised that no side yard walkways that impede side yard swales shall be permitted. Please note that the town does not allow any service connections for Part 4. That is not, as it is not within the urban boundary. Niagara Region, please refer to comments on consent applications. NPCA, please refer to comments on consent applications. No public comments were received at the time of writing this report. Are the variances minor in nature? Yes, as functional private amenity area is still maintained on the site, drainage concerns will be addressed through a lot grading and drainage plan. Are the variances desirable for the development or use of the land? Yes, the required variances are not anticipated to have a significant impact on the streetscape or adjacent properties. Do the variances maintain the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw? Yes, the intent of the rear yard setback is to ensure separation between residential uses and to ensure there remains adequate amenity area for the lots in question. There would appear to be ample separation to neighboring land uses in terms of rear yard setback. The existing structures are currently on or near the edge of the top of slope and are closer to the significant woodland than the proposed semi-detached dwelling. Do the variances maintain the general intent and purpose of the official plan? Yes, the variances will facilitate appropriate redevelopment and intensification within an existing residential neighborhood and do not conflict with any policies subject to demonstration of appropriate urban design and fulfillment of the proposed conditions of approval. Based on the analysis, staff is of the opinion the variances are minor in nature, conform to the general policies and intent of both the official plan and zoning bylaw, and are appropriate for the development and use of the land. Planning staff recommend that application numbers A6/2024P and A7/2024P be approved subject to the following conditions: that all necessary building and demolition permits be acquired prior to construction commencing to the satisfaction of the chief building official. Town staff will require a comprehensive lot grading and drainage plan to demonstrate that stormwater runoff will not negatively impact or rely on neighboring properties to the satisfaction of the Director of Public Works. That the approval of minor variance is subject to consent files B4/2024P and B5/2024P obtaining final approval.
Thank you, Ms. Leach. Mr. Highcoop, would you like to speak to the minor variances?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My submissions are fairly quite similar to those of staff. The existing dwellings are closer to the existing top of slope line or the proposed rear property line. So the proposal in front of you this evening actually creates more rear yard amenity space than the existing dwellings have today. I would secondly submit that there are no rear yard neighbors here that would be impacted from the proximity of the proposed dwellings to the lot line. And thirdly, I would submit that on these types of developments, a rear yard amenity area, say a patio or a deck, should the owner choose to do one, is approximately 10 or 12 feet. So the 4.5 meters on Part 2 was done purposefully to ensure that there's appropriate separation between a future deck or patio, should an owner choose one, and the property line, to be able to traverse around the rear of that, maintain a fence, run a lawnmower, those kind of things. And so the reason why we've increased it on Part 1 to 5.75 as opposed to the 4.5 is to really maintain that same line of the built form. As you can see on the concept sketch provided, we outlined the proposed building envelopes based on what zoning permits. Moving forward now, we would move into a detailed design stage, but likely the angles of the proposed dwellings the rear walls would not be angled in a manner that is shown there. Most often the dwellings are squared off. So it is likely that the rear yard setback that we're seeking tonight is solely for the pinch point or the westerly side of the proposed dwellings. So there will be certain areas that exceed the proposed variance considerably and may even meet the existing requirement. But until I have a specific house design, I'm not sure, but I wanted to point that out for you. So further to those points, I feel that the proposed applications in front of you tonight meet the 4 tests of the Planning Act and are considered minor in nature. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Any questions for Mr. Highcoop?
None here.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any comments from the audience on the minor variances? Yes, come on up. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Second time. What we're looking at here is, this is the setback from the rear of the building, the proposed building, to the top of slope, I guess you would call it. And according to the bylaw, it's supposed to be 7.5 meters, and they're asking for a reduction to something less. So I have a concern with this, with the back of this property along the top of slope, apparently there's a requirement for them to put a solid fence along there so people can't actually go through to the valley lands. I read that in some other part of the documentation somewhere, and there's going to be no way for anyone living in those units to be able to go to the back of the valley lands. They're going to be designated as sort of a protected area. So even though they bought a nice spot on this new unit, they can't go down into the valley. So they're going to have just basically their backyard to be dealing with. It seems like it's not a lot of space, but I also have a huge concern about the slope and the potential slope erosion. The existing places that have been there for years and years, 80 years, 100 years, something like that, they've had all kinds of rainstorms and everything else, and there's been no issues with the valley. So the way they're situated right now, no problem. Once you introduce change, suddenly you're going to potentially have problems. And we saw what happened when they developed 190 next door to us, the new condos over there. They must have had about 6 layers of silt fence up the back of that property. They were trying to prevent runoff. They couldn't do it. It kept going underneath them. It was a huge mess. It flooded the valley and made a bunch of mud down in our valley. Anyways, you can say you can put silt fence up, everything's going to be fine, but once you start changing stuff, you have problems. So my preference is to have those things as far as away from the valley as possible. So I wouldn't support this variance. And plus, are we dealing with a 2 or 3 story building here, or is it only a 1-story building? Like this has never been outlined anywhere as to, are we dealing with one of those big 3-story flat buildings that we're looking at here? Or is it a standard building, a 1-story building? Don't know. It's never been outlined. So it's hard to visualize what's going to be going on there. And I guess that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughtful comments, Mr. Young. Any questions? Okay, none for me either. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, come on up.
So Mr. Highcoop is correct. A lot of the front of that existing property is presently covered with asphalt. And most of the area that the present 3 dwellings are on is not heavily wooded. However, I believe there are at least 1, maybe 2 trees that would be protected that are on what would be probably part 2. And I think if you're going to put 2 houses in that little space, that they'll probably be cut. My concern is not so much for the woodlot property itself towards the back, towards the north, as that if there is any disturbance of the existing slope, there will be damage. It's inevitable. And for that reason, and also because I've been driving up and down that road for nearly over 70 years. And I guarantee you that coming over the crest of the hill is going to be a problem. I would recommend that the committee, before they grant these variances, which would permit 4 dwellings on a space where there has hitherto been 1, because notice that the other dwelling that's to be torn down is on part 4 that's going to be left as it is. I think that I would recommend that the committee come out, drive up and down that road a few times, and pay attention as you come over the hill to where you start to see that area. I know exactly where you start to see it. Standing in the driveway will not tell you that. My father put in a turnaround driveway on a lot that's over the crest of the hill in the 60s because it was dangerous then. It's more dangerous now. I do recommend that the committee come and look at it, and you could look at it from the point of view of how the traffic moves there, and I'd be happy to show you what I think are legitimate concerns about the destabilizing of the slope at the back of these properties. Let me know if you want to take me up on it. However, I have a couple of specific questions, and if you look at the proposed Part 1 and Part 2, I would like to know what acreage do they encompass? As there, I can see that there's something that says square feet on there, but mine's so tiny I can't read it.
I don't have that answer readily available, but, oh, wait, sorry. I do see the overall, whoops. Part 1 is 380 meters squared. I don't know what that is in acres. So I'd invite Mr. Hycoop to respond, and later we can get the exact answer for you if you want to know what the
Do you have
acreage
Part
is.
2? How big Part 2 is?
Part 2 is 348.
Okay. So my question for the committee is, under the existing plan, how many houses or how many dwellings would be permitted on that much space? This is a proposal to put 4 dwellings on those, and Mr. Chairman, perhaps you could ask Mr. Hycoop how many square feet each of these 4 dwellings will have.
So I will just
know that?
Yeah, I think I can respond to that, because I'll say a couple of things. There is the square footage on the plan, so we can see what the proposed size of the dwellings will be, the approximate size. There's no variances sought as it relates to the size or the number of dwellings or the location of the dwellings either. So what's before the committee is whether or not it's appropriate to reduce the setbacks, whether or not a 4.5 meter setback is appropriate on one side and 5.75 is appropriate on the other side. That's the question before us right now, whether it meets the tests, whether that's acceptable or not. So that's what we're looking at. So that's all that we're addressing at this time.
I understand that, but the square footage of the dwellings will necessarily affect how much setback you can have.
Right.
And I think that under the present Planning Act, there are stipulations for how many dwellings or the size of dwellings you can put on a property of a given size, which is basically what my question is.
Right.
And that's how that might affect that.
I understand better now. Thank you for clarifying that. And the zoning bylaw does deal with minimum sizes and sizes of dwellings. So there is a relationship between the setback and the size of dwelling. So I think I understand your comment now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think reducing the setback is problematic, and that may affect, what's now permitted may affect your decision in this matter. But I'd invite you to come and take a look, because presumably, well, I don't know. Have you now approved 4 dwellings with these particular driveways?
Yeah, so the consent application's been approved, and we're now looking at the variances.
Only the setback.
As it relates to the setback, that's right.
Well, I'd be happy to show you why I think the setback is insufficient, especially given that, in both cases, you're reducing them by nearly a half. And I understand that especially in Part 1, much of that setback is presently concrete. But anything that's going to be removed, so right away that whole slope will be destabilized. And in Part 2, there's a garage there and another building that will be removed, which will equally destabilize that drop off. But if you've already approved 4 buildings with driveways, then it's kind of pointless to go and look at it. But I would submit that it's probably better to go and look at it before you approve it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. And certainly I've looked at the property. I've done a site visit, and I regularly travel on Canberra. I live nearby and cycle and drive, and have even parked on Canberra on one occasion as well. So I am very familiar with the site, and I do know the property. So I appreciate those comments. Thank you. Is there anyone registered online to speak?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do not have anyone registered online, and it is 6:18 p.m., and we've received no emails with regard to the subject applications.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to, maybe before I do that, actually, I should invite Mr. Haikup. I didn't kind of address or have a chance to address some of the comments we received, so let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. So just in response to some of the comments, so there will be a requirement to put a chain link fence along that stable top of slope. So the intent of the policy is to protect that habitat and ensure that human disturbance does not impact that habitat. So that's why the fence is required along that stable top of slope line, which is now the conditionally approved severance line. So in regards to the slope and the erosion, these dwellings were built in the 1930s, or so I can recall. At that point in time, there was not the level of sophistication that we have in this day and age as it relates to geotechnical engineering and understanding what the load-bearing capacities of stable top of slopes are, and their associated soil types. We're very aware that it's sandy here. We're on the Fawn Hill Kame. But that's why part and parcel to this application was a geotech report. So that geotech report considered the location of the proposed dwellings, and in the addendum provided confirms that there's no issues from the geotechnical engineering perspective as it relates to the erosion. Certainly through the construction process, the maintenance of silt fencing needs to be done properly to ensure that any erosion or soil disturbance is not carried down the back of slope. Best practices as it relates to that type of fencing is to actually bury the first 1.5 feet of it in the ground through the installation of that fence, so there is no gap. So that's what would happen here. In terms of the design of the proposed dwellings, as I indicated earlier, I do not have a finalized design at this point in time, but it is anticipated that they would be 2-story dwellings. That is what I know about the proposed built form. As it relates to the rear yard area, and there's some questions about the size of the lots. So the proposed dwellings, as you indicated, Mr. Chair, meet the minimum lot area requirement. So that lot area requirement is 165 meters squared, whereas we're providing the smallest one is at 167, 180, 188, and 192 meters squared. So they are larger than the minimum area requirement. And so I would suggest that further, as I outlined, the rear yard amenity area is greater than what the existing dwelling has today. The existing dwelling has about a 2-meter setback from the existing slope. I don't have a dimension here, but more or less that's what we're looking at. So from my perspective, we are improving the situation from what it exists today. And notwithstanding the 4 tests of the minor variance under the Planning Act, it's really a test over impact. In my opinion, There is no negative impact to the surrounding properties, the valley land slope, or the significant wildlife habitat. Happy to answer any further questions if you have them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just kind of a process question. Why the variances now if you're not sure the building designs at this stage? Usually when we get variance applications, there is a, architectural plans available or nearly finalized.
Yeah, so at this point in time, given the nature of the application, many of the moving parts, considering the EIS and the geotechnical components, we weren't sure how things were going to go, truthfully, and so we wouldn't want to make that investment upfront, not knowing exactly how things would transpire. So unfortunately, I don't have that design. I would have liked to, but I don't. Because I would agree, generally a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? But notwithstanding that, the tests of the built form are independent from what it looks like, and what you're looking at is whether or not a setback is appropriate from a boundary line to a wall, which the visual appearance of what that wall looks like has no bearing on whether or not that distance is appropriate from my perspective.
Sorry, I'm speaking to Mr. Highcoop right now, ma'am. No, ma'am, please. This is, no. We are conducting this meeting in a way that we speak just to the person at the podium. Thank you. Are there, ma'am, please, I don't want to have to ask you to leave the room. That's what will happen if you don't follow the decorum of the committee. Thank you.
Roger's Rules of Order and what a point of information means. Because a point of information is answered in the process of a discussion.
Ma'am, can you leave the room, please?
No.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a break.
Sure.
Thank you.